Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. This podcast has been brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I should probably mention that before I get started. But today, folks, we are going to be talking about French cars. French cars I like to call the silent innovators. And not to say that they are silent in the sense that they are small companies and they do not produce very many cars. It's to say that because we have never really had a consistent French automotive presence here in the United States, a lot of us Americans are unaware of the innovations that French car companies have brought to us over the years. So my goal in this podcast is to not only introduce you all to some French automobile manufacturers, but to also introduce to you some of their, I guess, innovations that they have brought to the car world over the years. Everything from hydro-pneumatic self-leveling suspensions to four-wheel disc brakes. I mean, some of the things that we take absolutely for granted on cars today were pioneered and first put into practice by the French automobile companies. So we have a lot. We owe them a lot for some of the technological advances in car history. So let's get started. In this first segment, we are going to be talking about the Peugeot Automobile Company. In segment 2, we're going to be talking about Citroën. In segment 3, we are going to be talking about Renault. And in segment 4, we are going to be talking about my personal opinion. Which one would I personally own and drive if I lived in a place where there were French cars available for purchase, and why I think that, and what I think of some of the others. And if we have time, I may very well give you an update on my car, Betty Love, and to let you all know what has finally happened concerning my whole tail lamp situation. So please stay tuned and enjoy the podcast. So let's get started with Peugeot. Peugeot was founded in 1882, 138 years ago. Now, mind you, if you remember, the first car was created in 1886. So Peugeot did not start out making automobiles. Peugeot started out making, I believe, like sewing machines or something. I don't know. I can't remember. But they did not start out making automobiles. Peugeot serves the entire world except the U.S., Canada, and North Korea. This is almost like a joke. When I was reading this, I was like, gee, when would I ever hear that the United States, Canada, and North Korea will all be lumped in the same category? Ah, yes, because they do not have Peugeot cars for sale in their countries. So there you have it. That's why, that's the one thing the North Koreans, the Canadians, and the Americans all have in common is the fact that we do not have Peugeot for sale in our countries. They are an award-winning company, having received 6 European Car of the Year awards. Their models have received European Car of the Year 6 times. That's pretty impressive. Of course, I don't know how competitive that is, but considering how many European car companies there are, you've got all the Italian brands, you've got all the French brands, you've got all the British brands, all the German brands, and all the Swedish brands. And there might be some other brands in there too, like I think the Spanish brand Seat is Spanish, even though it's a Volkswagen group, but still Spanish nonetheless. I mean, that's a lot of competition. And for French cars to be, considered European Car of the Year 6 times in a row, or not 6 times in a row, but 6 times overall. And that's just one company. We haven't even gotten to the other companies yet. That's pretty darn impressive. So one thing I would just like to do, I'd like to go to Europe and drive one of these cars and see if they really are what they're cracked up to be. I mean, I drive them all the time in video games, but video games, more or less, the cars, they don't have a real feel to them because you're controlling them through a controller and looking at them through a screen. I mean, it is what it is at that point. I will say, though, in Forza Horizon, my Citroen, I think DS3 or whatever, I don't know, some sort of hatchback. I mean, that's one of my best cars in the game, but that's not even a Peugeot, so I digress. We'll talk about Citroen later on. But, so one thing I thought was interesting that I decided to include in this profile of the Peugeot car company is that they have the second lowest for average CO2 emissions amongst generalist brands in Europe. Now, let me translate that. Basically, they have the second lowest CO2 emissions of any car brand in Europe. By the generalist brands, they mean ones that are sold to the general public that are not high luxury brands. Like, for example, Rolls-Royce would not be considered a generalist brand. Bentley is not a generalist brand. A Peugeot is one. Nissan, Toyota, those are all generalist brands. Those are cars that sell to the general public that aren't prohibitively expensive. They're not luxury car companies. So I thought that was very interesting. And they came second only to Renault, which is another which is another French car company. So the French, not only are they innovative, they appear to be environmentally conscious and environmentally friendly as well. So that's very good. Of course, there's probably a lot more that I can say concerning that, but this is not a science channel in which we're talking about the potential impact on the environment of cars. I think all of us car people know that cars have detrimental impacts to the environment. We either care and we want to see electric cars and hybrid cars come into purpose, or we're either of the old guard and we don't care and we like to continue driving our gas-guzzling cars. I'm probably somewhere in between, but I lean more towards wanting to drive my gas-guzzling car because, I mean, it's fun. I enjoy it. So, yeah, moving on. They have a reputation for reliability. Now, of course, this is not something that I would have ever known because one thing that I love above all else is a car that is reliable. I would sacrifice luxury for reliability, which is why I now drive a Buick instead of a Cadillac. Cadillacs were luxurious, but Cadillacs with the North Star engine were not reliable. I drive a Buick now. A Buick is luxurious enough and much more reliable than my Cadillac DeVille's could ever hope to have been. So this is what makes me intrigued towards Peugeot, the fact that they have a reputation for reliability. And this is not just your reputation for reliability. It's like, oh, my car has never left me stranded before. I mean, there's people who drive Mercedes-Benz W221s or W220s that say, oh, well, my car has never stranded me before. Yeah, that's not an accurate gauge of reliability. However, what I will say is an accurate gauge of reliability. Many say, and this has been proven, that many 50s and 60s models are still running in Africa and Cuba well into the modern age. We're talking about Peugeot cars here. They have cars that are 50, 60, 70 years old that are still running in some of the more underdeveloped parts of the world where they may not be able to afford new cars or they may not be able to get new cars imported because of some trade rules and whatnot. That happens to be the case with Cuba. I mean, that's why Cuba has tons of old cars from the 40s, 50s, and 60s because after, the mid-60s, they put an embargo on Cuba, couldn't trade in new cars. So that's why, Cuba has this very interesting car culture because they have like Oldsmobiles, Buicks, Cadillacs, Chevys, Fords, all from, the 40s and the 50s that are still on the road today because the people have no choice. Those are the cars that they had, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and because they haven't been able to import any new cars unless the country has lifted the embargo on them, they have to continue reusing the old cars that they've had. And so it's a very interesting sort of car culture in Cuba. Well, guess what? It's not just American cars. Apparently Peugeot's part of it too. I mean, imagine having a car company in which you can say that you know without a shadow of a doubt that a huge percentage of your cars sold 50, 60, 70 years ago are still running. They're not in scrapyards somewhere. They're not in junkyards somewhere. Granted, this is a unique situation. I doubt that there are, that many in France still running around. But the fact that they're still running around and people are still driving them, I'm assuming fairly original. That's a testament to reliability. So as far as Peugeot goes, I mean, Peugeot, of the three that I read about, because they're like the big three: Peugeot, Renault, and Clio. Not Clio. Clio is a brand, is a model of Renault. Sorry, Peugeot, Citroën, and Renault. I mean, this is the only one that I read that has a reputation for reliability. So maybe that's why they won European Car of the Year 6 times. But moving on, some of the innovations that Peugeot had. Peugeot manufactured the first convertible with a retractable hardtop in 1933. Now, I remember learning about this a long time ago. And then, because I haven't used the knowledge, I forgot it. And then when I read this, it jogged my memory. I was like, wow, I remember reading about this. It was a 1933 Peugeot that was the first production car with a retractable hardtop. So if today you can drive, I don't know, your Lexus SC around, thank the French, because they had the first retractable hardtop the world had ever seen. 87 years ago. That's insane. Think about an 87-year-old car with a retractable hardtop. Hardtops had not become popular until probably the 90s. I mean, most convertibles before this, if they were hardtops, they were not retractable hardtops. Retractable hardtops didn't become popular. I probably dare say probably the 90s. Ford had retractable hardtops, but like I said, that wasn't the most popular sort of thing. The most popular sort of, convertible top was the soft top situation. I mean, retractable hardtops were not very common. I dare I say probably until the 80s or the 90s. And they were doing it, 50, 60 years before that. And that's insane. Peugeot pulled out of the American market and the Canadian market in 1991 and returned to Mexico in 1997 after a 36-year absence. And they are planning on bringing Peugeot back to the United States by 2023. So get this. From 1991 to 2023, that would have been a 32-year absence they've had from the American market. Now, I have to wonder, what will the Peugeot models look like that come to the United States? Because French cars have been known to be not only innovative, but they've also been known to look strange. The French have a very unique way of styling their cars. If you are hearing this, you should probably look up some French cars. Like, for example, the Citroën DS. That's a French car that is, it's an acquired taste. I love it. I don't love the way it looks, but I love the car. But you'll soon find out why I love this car so much in the next segment when we talk about Citroën. But yeah, so one thing that I've been tactfully trying to avoid, but I have to mention, is Stellantis. Now, I'm not talking about like Stellaris, like the drug that people take, the medicine. No, I'm talking about Stellantis. Stellantis apparently is going to be a merger of the PSA, which is the Society of Peugeot and Citroën Automobiles, and Fiat Chrysler, which we all know is Fiat Chrysler. I mean, there's not really a way to say anything about it. They're going to merge and create Stellantis, and Stellantis should be a thing by 2021. So in just a few months, Stellantis is going to be the parent company of FCA and PSA, and then that's how the French are planning on returning to the North American market, is through Stellantis. I've even heard that Chrysler might get a resurgence because, as you all know, Chrysler only has 2 models. Chrysler might get a resurgence by rebadging French cars as Chryslers. So I am super, super intrigued to see what will happen. with that. I first learned about this on a comment section in a Facebook post in which Jeep was like, oh, we're going to come out with an electric Wrangler, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, okay, so what? You're going to come out with an electric Wrangler. Hummer already has the GMC Hummer EV. And like, you're going to have to do a lot more if you think you're going to dethrone the Hummer EV. And then this woman who's obviously a staunch Jeep supporter was like, oh, well, you know, the Hummer EV hasn't even been put into production yet. The Jeep is a lot closer, blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, I understand that. But Chrysler reliability, Chrysler is pretty much dead. And their reliability is pretty dead, too. And then they're going to have to do a lot more than to just slap, you know, electric powertrain in a Wrangler and think that's going to solve their issues. And to which the woman began to kind of understand what I was saying. And then I had been talking about reliability issues. And then she mentioned, she's like, well, we don't know what this merger with PSA is going to bring. I was like, whoa, what's PSA? And she's like, Peugeot and Citroën, the French automobile manufacturers. I was like, whoa, back up. They're merging with Fiat Chrysler? She's like, yeah, look up Stellantis. And I just had to do it. And I'm going to have to dedicate a podcast to this specifically. But I have been so wanting to talk about Stellantis because I'm like, this is insane. This is a game changer. I mean, just when I thought that Chrysler was dead and Fiat Chrysler was just going to go down, Chrysler was going to be gone, they managed to pull themselves out of the muck again. I mean, boy, Chrysler's like a cat. Chrysler has like 9 lives. I mean, there was the financial crisis in the 80s. There was, what else? There was, fiddlesticks. There was the bailout in the when the housing market crashed in 2008. There was the merger with Daimler Chrysler back in the late 90s. Now there was Fiat Chrysler recently, and now they're merging with Stellantis, or they're merging with the French car companies to create Stellantis as another sort of, I guess, bailout mechanism to keep them all from, you know, going under. And let's just see what the French and the Italians have to offer the American market, because the French have not been known for being successful in the American market, and neither have the Italians been. And we've got an American company that's riding on their tailcoats. So hopefully, maybe Peugeot's reputation for reliability can rub off and make all the other, you know, Stellantis cars, I guess, reliable as well. Do I think it'll happen? I doubt it. But it severely changes my perspective on Chrysler going downhill within the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, they're probably not going to go anywhere, depending on how successful this Stellantis foolishness is. But anyway, I digress. Please stay tuned for the next segment of the podcast in which we talk about our next French car company, Citroën. Enjoy the break.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Okay, welcome back, folks. So in this segment, we are going to be talking about Citroën, which is probably the most innovative of the French car companies, and you will soon find out why. In the last segment, we spoke about Peugeot, and now we're going to talk about Citroën. So Citroën was founded in 1919. It is the youngest of these 3 car companies that I have chosen to tell you all about today. Probably the most innovative of the French car manufacturers. I read what I wrote, but I already said that. The Citroën traction, or I should probably say that in French, Citroën traction avant, was the world's first mass-produced front-wheel drive car, produced in 1934. Now, fun fact, when I went to the Tampa Bay Automobile Museum, I saw the world's first front-wheel drive car, which I believe was in 1899 something, and it was also French. So the French invented front-wheel drive. That's amazing. Considering how many cars these days are front-wheel drive, the French have left their mark on automobile history. And the thing is, it's kind of sad because besides some of the more obvious innovations that the French have made, front-wheel drive has really gone unnoticed. It's gone unnoticed, severely gone unnoticed. I mean, like, who even thinks about front-wheel drive, how that's an engineering marvel? Who even thinks about that? Nobody thinks about that. That's really gone unnoticed. I mean, in the car community, if you know your history, you know that Cadillac came out with the electric starter. You know that, some other brands came out with this sort of thing. But nobody knows that it was the French that invented front-wheel drive. I didn't know that until I went to the Automobile Museum in Tampa. And then I saw the first front-wheel drive automobile, which was made by a French company. That's obviously no longer functioning because I was like 1890-something. That car was produced. But that's still amazing to me. The French invented front-wheel drive. My Buick is front-wheel drive. Your car, statistically, is probably front-wheel drive. Most cars these days are sold are front-wheel drive. SUVs now have front-wheel drive, which they're technically not SUVs, they're CUVs, crossover utility vehicles. But the best-selling cars on the market have always been front-wheel drive. So we have a lot to thank, the French for as far as automobile engineering marvels go. This was the beginning of Citroën's reputation as an innovative powerhouse, with the 1934 Citroën Traction Avant, Traction Avant. The Traction Avant was also a unibody car with four-wheel independent suspension. Now, we're talking about 1934. This was 86 years ago. 86 years ago, the French were producing a front-wheel drive car with four-wheel independent suspension. What does that sound like? That sounds like a modern automobile. And, get this, it was unibody. So we're talking about how there were different methods of manufacturing a car. Most cars used the Model T train of thought, which was a body mounted on a ladder frame, bolted to it, and the ladder frame was the chassis of the car, and it had all the mechanical components onto it, and the body was a separate unit that was bolted on. This was cheap and easy to produce. Rear wheels were connected by a solid rear axle and did not have independent suspension from each other. It was the easiest to produce, it was the cheapest, and granted, that's probably why the Model T was so successful, because of its engineering. But as cars began to get heavier, as cars began to become more capable, and the necessity for more capable cars grew, that's a very rigid sort of way of producing cars. And it's not very flexible in several meanings of that term. Not flexible as far as suspension goes. Your suspension's real stiff. And not flexible as far as, metaphorically flexible. It's not able to do what other cars are able. It's not as versatile, such a rigid setup like that. So now you have Citroën coming out with a unibody car that is front-wheel drive and that has four-wheel independent suspension. That sounds like my Buick Park Avenue, which was made, 70 years after this car. It's front-wheel drive, four-wheel independent suspension, and it's a unibody car. That sounds like a Ford Fusion. That sounds like a Chevy Malibu. That sounds like, your Toyota Camry. That sounds like your Honda Civic. That sounds like your Acura RL. I mean, that sounds like a lot of regular old cars that we see every single day that we just take for granted in the modern age, that the French were producing this years and years and years before anybody thought of it. I mean, the only American car company of that same era that was producing front-wheel drive cars was Cord. And we all know what happened to Cord, Duesenberg, and Auburn. They all went out of business. So this car company not only was pioneering in the front-wheel drive scene, it was pioneering in the unibody scene, and it was pioneering in the four-wheel independent suspension scene. And that's not even all. That's not even all. This is how amazing Citroën cars have been. That's just the Citroën Traction Avant. In 1954, Citroën introduced the world's first car with a self-leveling hydro-pneumatic suspension. Guess what car that was? That was the Citroën DS. And the Citroën DS was the first mass-produced car with modern disc brakes. Another thing we take for granted, disc brakes. Disc brakes are far superior to drum brakes as far as stopping power goes. There was a time that cars had four-wheel drum brakes. Imagine how scary that is. Imagine how scary that is. You didn't have ABS back in those days. You had drum brakes. So imagine getting up to 70 and having to stop on a dime on like I-75 or something because some idiot in front of you got into a car crash. Driving a car without disc brakes. And then you have to consciously remember to pump your brakes so your brakes don't lock up because you couldn't have ABS in those days. And you're driving this 5,000 Hulk of an automobile, and you have to bring it to zero or make some sort of evasive, you're going to die. Either you're going to die or you're going to get severely maimed. There ain't no way you're going to be able to stop that thing in time. Your reflexes aren't fast enough. With disc brakes, however, disc brakes are a lot better for situations like that. They're a lot safer, too, which is why most modern cars, especially cars that are on the heavier side, have four-wheel disc brakes. I will say, however, though, I did see a car the other day with drum brakes on it, and it was a modern car. I believe it was like a Ford Fiesta or something. Then again, the Ford Fiesta is also a really tiny little car with like a 3-cylinder engine and barely weighs like 1,500 pounds. I don't know how much it weighs, but it barely weighs anything. So that's probably why it can get away with having drum brakes on the rear. But far and wide, this formula, these things that Citroën pioneered are basis for the vast majority of cars today. And that's something we sincerely have to thank the French for. No matter how snobby they think they are, we have to thank them. Because without them, there would be a lot of safety features that would have either never come or that would have come a lot later than they did. And these things probably saved a lot of people's lives. So, I mean, they are deserving of the rewards that they got. So moving on. We have the Citroën DS, which was the first mass-produced car with modern disc brakes. Citroën has had a legendary reputation. It was a 1923 Citroën that was the first car to travel around Australia, a journey of 30,000 miles. The only car that was able to do it back then was a Citroën. An endurance challenge. Citroën won that. That's amazing. And another thing, with the Traction Avant, Citroën introduced a whole new way of engineering automobiles. And in 1974, it merged with Peugeot to become what is now known as PSA, which will now be soon known as Stellantis as they merge with Fiat Chrysler. So my thoughts on Citroën. Citroën is probably the one that I am the most familiar with. And not because I have driven Citroëns in real life. I've never seen a Citroën. Actually, no, that's not true. I saw Citroëns when I went to Japan. They're probably the ones that I'm most familiar with because I like to drive them in my video games. They're cool. I mean, I know that sounds super anticlimactic, but they're cool. I like them. And like I mentioned, in Forza Horizon, one of my best cars is a Citroën, hatchback or whatever. I mean, that's one of my best cars. But I've grown to appreciate them just through the media. Through the gaming, the video game, the car, simulators. I've grown to appreciate Citroëns because they're unique. They're unique in style. They're unique in driving experience, even just in the games. and they're unique in their approach to certain things. I mean, think of it. Not only was the Citroën DS, one of the most amazing cars, we have to think of the Citroën 2 Chevaux that I talk about, beloved European economy cars of old. I mean, that was one of the most loved cars in the world. And even today, even after they haven't been in production for 30 years, since 1990, you can still see them on the roads of France. The Citroën 2 Chevaux. I mean, these are amazing automobiles. These are amazing automobiles, and it's a shame, honestly. It's a shame that they haven't been brought back to the United States. I would like to see more Citroëns on the road of the United States. I mean, the French president has a Citroën. This is like France's Cadillac. The most innovative car company they have, the one that the president prefers to drive, and the one that is the most French in every way you can think possible. Cadillac is the same way. It's the most American you can think in any way possible. And it's the most luxurious. And not only that, it's the one that the president has always been known to drive. I mean, yeah, you might have had presidents that had Lincolns. Lincolns were pretty popular amongst presidents too. But I want to say the vast majority of presidential limousines have been Cadillacs. I could be wrong, but I want to say the vast majority of them have been Cadillacs. I mean, the first one was a Cadillac. It was Al Capone's Cadillac, as a matter of fact. But, yeah. So, Citroën is France's Cadillac. And Peugeot could be their Lincoln. And Renault, I mean, you'll find out about Renault soon. So, yeah. Please stay tuned after the break. And that was my spiel on Citroën and how it's probably the best, probably the best French automobile maker as far as just, innovation goes. But anyway, I digress. So please stay tuned after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, welcome back, folks. So in this segment, we are going to be talking about Renault, which is the last of the big three automobile makers in France. In the last segment, we spoke about Citroën and their innovations. Now let's talk about Renault. Renault, I want to say, first and foremost, is probably the one that is best known for racing in this group. They do lots of rallying and other sorts of foolishness. They're probably the one that's best known for racing. They were founded in 1899, which was 131 years ago. Wow, man, that was already 100. No. Was it 131 years ago? It was 121 years ago. Pardon, I can't do math. But still, that's a long time ago. Part of the Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi Alliance. All right. So just keep that in mind. Think about Nissan and Mitsubishi quality. Now think about Renault. You will find that they share family traits, if I could put it that way. They became the largest producer of light vehicles in 2017. What constitutes a light vehicle? I have no earthly clue. But That's what the article I read said, so I decided to put it in. If you all know what constitutes a light vehicle, let me know. I don't know, put it in the comments if someone actually listens to this. Put it in the comments, and, if someone actually follows these instructions, and let me know something, what constitutes a light vehicle. It became the ninth largest producer of automobile manufacturing in the world. Renault collaborated with AMC, as a matter of fact, to produce their version of the Rambler in Europe to compete against the German brands like a small competitor against the fin-tail Mercedes of the era. So let me elaborate on that. AMC by this time in the late 70s, early 80s was beginning to struggle. And you will find that AMC did not last past the 80s. They did not last into the 90s. They still had some models that were brought into the 90s that were grandfathered in when they were sold to Chrysler, but they themselves as a brand did not exist past the 80s. So now you have Renault that is collaborating with AMC to basically import the Rambler to Europe, tear it down partially, and then rebuild it with French components, and I guess make it a bit more luxurious to compete against like the smaller German fin-tail models, which would evolve into today's C-Class and into today's E-Classes. That's what they were doing. So they, at least from what I gathered, they would sell these tear-down kits. So the manufacturers would partially tear down a Rambler and then build it up with new French components and then ship it out to be sold under Renault's name to compete against, other European car brands. I find that kind of ridiculous. You would rather go through the trouble of importing an American car and partially tearing it down, not even just rebadging it. No, you're partially deconstructing it to reconstruct it with French materials, so it becomes a hybrid car in a sense. Not hybrid like gas and electric, but hybrid like it's two different car companies making one car. And it's got components from both. And then you sell it like that. I guess in that time, maybe they were in such dire financial straits that they just decided to justify this. But in my own mind, I find it absolutely ludicrous. I find it ridiculous. I feel like that's kind of stupid. But anyway, I digress. Once again, I am not the be-all and end-all of car opinions here. Like, I'm just a lowly, person from Cape Coral. I mean, I have no room to speak when it comes to what is smart and what is stupid as far as French car companies go. I will leave my comments for Chrysler. Anyway, moving on. So we get a Rambler in Europe to compete against the German brands, blah, 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 all of that foolishness. Okay, Renault even bailed out AMC from bankruptcy in 1979, right around this time, when they were deconstructing the Rambler and, doing all this foolishness as well. So it was quite amazing, actually. Quite amazing to see how a French car company was collaborating so heavily with an American car company. Granted, were there financial incentives involved? Absolutely, because it would have been smart of the French car company, Renault in this case, to bail out AMC because they had already invested so much money into them. But however, about 8 years later, in 1987, Renault sold AMC to Chrysler, and Chrysler turned them into the Jeep Eagle subsidiary, and Renault models in North America continued to be sold under the Jeep Eagle dealership network. So that's what ended up happening. That's how AMC crumbled, and I had no idea it had anything to do with the French, but the French had a pivotal role on having AMC being sold to Chrysler, and why Jeeps today are now Chrysler products, because back in those days they used to be AMC products. And until Renault pulled out of the American car, scene at some point, probably in the mid-90s, they were selling their cars underneath the Jeep Eagle dealership network that was now being run by Chrysler. I will say, though, you will notice that I have not mentioned many innovations of Renault. And that's because this one is probably the least innovative of them all. This one is probably the least successful of them all. This is the one that's had to go through several different mergers. I mean, they merged with AMC, then they sold AMC, they got the money, they were by themselves for a little bit. Then in 1998, I believe, they merged with Nissan and Mitsubishi, and Nissan, at that time was still making good things. Mitsubishi had never really made good things. They made some legendary sports cars, but as far as reliable cars, nah. Mitsubishi's never been known for their reliability. So they merged. Renault is like the Chrysler of France. If Citroen's the Cadillac, Peugeot's the Lincoln, this is the Chrysler. Or more accurately, if Citroen's GM, Peugeot is Ford, and then Renault is Chrysler. That's what it is. I mean, granted, in the United States, GM and Ford are not part of the same company, obviously. But as far as this demographic and the types of cars that they make, and really their stories and the sorts of things that they've been doing over their entire years, I mean, Renault, I feel like my assessment is pretty fair. Now, of course, if there are any French people out there who can tell me I'm dead wrong, please do, because I'm always willing to learn, and I'm always willing to be more accurate in my opinion and more accurate in the facts that I spew out to you all twice a week. But I want to really know if my assessment is correct. So what I think of when I think of Renault, I think of Renault as a car company that is very much like Nissan, not only because they merged, but I think of them as a car company that probably has some antiquated models, that's not really caring so much about their public perception, in the sense that they have these old antiquated models, they keep on selling them because people keep buying them, and I don't know, they've kind of become stagnant. That's kind of what Nissan has kind of done, Nissan and Infiniti, and it's because of the French. It's because of the French influence from Renault that's causing Nissan to be this way. It's bringing Nissan down, it's keeping Peugeot afloat, and it's bringing Mitsubishi up. That's really what it is. I mean, gosh, I really wish I had more to say about Peugeot, but, not Peugeot, Renault, but there really isn't much to say about that. I mean, they've got some legendary models, like the Renault Clio. That was like a rally car. But, I will say, though, Renault manufactured the first European minivan, the Espace, which means space in French. Not space like outer space. I don't think it means outer space. I think it means literal physical space. But then again, Espace in Creole means space. I don't know what it means in French, per se, if it also means outer space, but I know it means physical space. But anyway, so the Renault Espace was manufactured in 1985. That was the first European minivan. And in 1963, the Renault 8 was the first car with four-wheel disc brakes, which I find actually pretty interesting, knowing that it was Citroën that made the first car with disc brakes, and then Renault obviously took that technology and put it on all four wheels before anybody thought to do so back in 1963, which was, just to put into perspective, 57 years ago. And they won European Car of the Year 6 times, so they tied with Peugeot in doing that. Funny enough, I don't remember hearing about Citroën winning European Car of the Year, which I find that's kind of odd, because considering that they are so innovative. But yeah, they won that 6 times in the past 40 years, Renault, that is. But yeah, I guess my perspective on Renault is the fact that these cars are just, I don't know, the company's kind of complacent. I wish that they did more things, but at the same time, I don't foresee them coming to America anytime soon, because they're not going to be part of this Stellantis group. They are not part of the PSA automobiles, which are Citroën and Peugeot. They are their own thing. They have the merger with the Japanese companies, which, by the way, is very unique because that was the first sort of merger with a Japanese car company by a French car company that they had ever seen. So that was pretty unique. But as far as innovation goes, Renault has not been innovative. Renault is by my feeling, just trying to stay alive. Just trying to stay alive, trying to stay afloat, trying to do something in this vast car wilderness that they call the world. It's kind of disappointing that, so many car companies that used to be great have just gotten to the point where they're just, how do I put it? They're just complacent. It's like they got to the point where they don't think they can do anything good anymore. So they just let it happen. And like the financial pressures are eating them up and they just, they're like, well, we're doing the best we can, but like, there's not a point in, making any effort. And that's just sad. Not only is it sad, it's disappointing, it's unfortunate. That's not how it ever should be. That's never how it should be. It should be that, it should be that car companies are always looking to do the next greatest and the next best thing to keep their brands alive and to keep their brand perception positive in the eyes of the public. And when you get complacent to the point where the people are complaining about quality, you can hear them complaining about quality, and perhaps you even know that your quality is bad, and you just still keep on doing it? Like, that's so unfortunate. Which is why I'm very happy that Peugeot and Citroën, which are PSA, is merging with Chrysler. Because I think during the Daimler-Chrysler merger, Chrysler was still of a strong presence enough to have influence on Mercedes-Benz and made some of those Mercedes-Benz models from that merger era absolute junk, like the W220 S-Class. However, I will say, now that Chrysler has been so severely diminished, I don't think that they can have a negative impact. I don't think they can even have an impact in general. As far as, making the quality of, the Stellantis automobiles suffer. When Fiat Chrysler was a thing, it will soon no longer be a thing because they're going to be merging under Stellantis. But when it was a thing, you have Italian car companies over there working with the most unreliable American car company. That was obviously a disaster waiting to happen because the Italians have never made a reliable automobile. They're not known for that. Italian cars, just like my podcast said, live fast, die young, leave a good-looking corpse. I mean, that's how they live. That's how Italian cars are. They're gorgeous, they look good, but they are not reliable. So merging with an unreliable company just made Chrysler even more unreliable. But now that they're merging with some reliable companies, Peugeot and Citroën, maybe this might rub off on Chrysler enough to actually start caring about their perception and to actually start caring about doing something. And I feel like it would behoove of Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi to grab themselves by their bootstraps and start doing the same thing. Start manufacturing cars that you can be proud of. Start manufacturing cars that people are going to enjoy driving and are not going to complain because their paint is fading after they just bought their car because your build quality is just that poor. Like, quit offering things that people have issues with right off of the bat. Obviously, no car is perfect. Every car will give problems at some point during your ownership. But it shouldn't be so prevalent that whenever people think Nissan, they think, used to be great, now sucks. When they think Peugeot, used to be great, but no, when they think Renault, used to be great, but now sucks. When they think some other car company, Mitsubishi, used to be great, but now sucks. Like, that shouldn't be what comes to mind. It should be what comes to mind when you think of, some other great car companies. Used to be great, still is great. That's what it should be. Every car company should strive towards that. It's never good enough. It can always get better. And I feel like a company like Renault has just not realized this. So moving on, we're going to take a break. Please stay tuned after the break, and we're going to come up to segment 4, in which I'm going to talk about my own preference when it comes to the French car companies and what I think of them, honestly. So please stay tuned.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year, to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Okay, welcome back, car folks. This is the last segment of our podcast on French cars, which I like to call the silent innovators. Only reason why is because we do not know about them here in North America. So here we are. We have discussed Peugeot, we have discussed Citroën, we have discussed Renault, the big 3 French car companies. Which one would I drive? If you all have known me and heard my podcast by now, you all will find out that I am a luxury person through and through. I don't really much care for sports cars. I care for a car that has performance, but I will take luxury over performance any day, because knowing for the purposes someone is going to have a car, if you have a performance car, you can never use it to its full potential, so it's basically a waste. I am a luxury person through and through. Of these 3 car companies, Citroën is probably the one I would go with. Citroën is not only innovative, Citroën has known to be luxurious. Citroën is the preferred car of French presidents. Specifically this Citroën like DS6 or whatever. And Citroën has this unique sort of styling and this unique cachet to it. Like, oh, you drive a Citroën. And plus, they have the DS brand. The DS brand, which is a luxury subsidiary of Citroën, when they create, those cars that are more luxurious than their mainstream cars. So Citroën has always been sort of that cool and exciting new French car company that's always coming out with something new. That's why I compared them to Cadillac. And you all know me, I'm a Cadillac guy. But if I lived in France where I couldn't get a Cadillac, man, I'd probably get a Citroën. And they've been known for having good build quality. As far as their reliability goes, I don't know for sure, because the only thing I ever read was that Peugeot was known for reliability, and they have, 50, 60, 70-year-old cars still on the road. Citroën, however, I have not heard about their reliability. But I will say, if the first car to ever travel all around Australia was a 1923 Citroen. I mean, they must be onto something as far as reliability goes. It's kind of like Cadillac back in the day. Cadillac won some good endurance challenges. Rolls-Royce won endurance challenges. And so if they had that reputation for reliability back then, there's no reason for me to think that they wouldn't have at least some shred of reliability, being accredited to them so many years later. I tend to think that car companies that were bad to begin with might stay bad or get better. However, car companies that are reliable to begin with might get bad, or they might continue to have that reliability characteristic. I mean, it goes through ups and downs. Like Cadillacs back in those days used to be very reliable. Then Cadillac went through a period of about 40 years where they were like, kind of reliable, kind of not reliable. And I feel like they're beginning to become more reliable again. And Buick has always been known for its reliability until the modern age, really. Buick, after they got discontinued the 3800 engine, they began to go downhill within the past 10 years or so. But I feel like Citroen probably is still reliable, and even if it wasn't, goodness, I mean, it's the most luxurious, and that's probably what I care about, especially when it comes to car companies that I don't know. Point is, if I moved to France one day, I'd be willing to take a chance on a Citroen and owning it. It's probably going to be really idiosyncratic, meaning a lot of quirks and features, as Doug DeMuro would say. But you know what? I think I'm willing to deal with it. Here are my perceptions of French cars in general, however. French cars are odd. Like, I've discussed this when discussing different sorts of car companies across the world. The Germans are focused on engineering above all else. That's what all German cars are known for, is their complicated engineering. Japanese cars are focused on efficiency above all else. That's what they're known for. British cars have been focused on luxury. Even some of the more normal British cars have been more luxurious. I mean, Mini is the only one that I can think of that's not really luxurious, but Rover, Range Rover, Land Rover, Jaguar, Rolls-Royce, Bentley, all of those British car companies, even though Rolls-Royce and Bentley are technically German now, but still they originated in England. I mean, I think all of those British car companies are probably all focused on luxury. The Italian car companies are all focused on beauty and speed and performance. If not speed and performance, then pure beauty. Not reliability. American cars are focused above all else on comfort. Swedish cars are focused above all else on safety. French cars are focused above all else on uniqueness. Uniqueness and innovation. I mean, that is what the French ought to be known for. Uniqueness and innovation. Each of those French cars, they're not one of a kind because they produce millions of them, but their ideas are one of a kind. These are not ideas that other automobile companies have sought to put into production. For example, Citroen's hydro-pneumatic self-leveling suspension was adopted in some Rolls-Royce cars and sold under license so that Rolls-Royce would be able to use it. Mercedes-Benz tried to emulate that to the same effect by using, instead of hydro-pneumatic, which would be like, part air, part, fluid in the suspension, they tried completely making a suspension operate with pressurized air, which is, I guess, the predecessor to today's airmatic systems in Mercedes-Benz's. However, they could never achieve the same effect as the French, so they finally caved and used the Citroen-style hydro-pneumatic self-leveling suspension in some of their Mercedes-Benz models, which I find hilarious. As proud as the Germans are for their innovation and their engineering, they eventually caved and used the French engineering system in one of their cars. Because it had gotten to the point, I guess, where they just couldn't figure it out, and the air suspension was not achieving the same effect, so they just decided to use the patented material under license from the French car company in one of their cars. I can't remember which car it was, but I'm talking about this is probably the 70s. So French cars have always been innovative, and they're odd, they're unique, they're quirky, and I feel like, people don't appreciate them enough. I saw a fair number of French cars when I went over to Japan, and it was interesting to see them. Unfortunately, I never got to ride in any of them because I didn't really ride in cars, frankly. I walked and I took trains and maybe the occasional bus. When I was in Japan, I didn't really ride around in cars so much. And the cars that we did ride around in were all Japanese. I rode around, they weren't all Japanese. I rode around in a Volvo at some point. I rode around in a Toyota Noah most of the time because that's what us missionaries used to drive around. There was a Daihatsu Wake that I rode around in that my friend Shuta has. I rode around in an Audi that my friend Shinmako had. I'm trying to think. What other cars did I ride around in Japan? I rode around in a Toyota Corona. That's what Murray's son had. He was the pastor that I lived with the first year that I was there. Yeah, other than that, I don't think I rode around in any other Japanese market cars. And Suyo-san, my self-proclaimed Japanese grandmother, had a Volkswagen Golf. But yeah, I mean, I didn't ride in any of the French cars that I saw in Japan, but, I still saw them. I appreciated them. I took pictures of them. I passed by them. I saw them drive past, and I always wondered what they were like. Always wondered what they were like. And, the thing is, I give props to the French. These car companies have continued to innovate even into the modern age. And the French might be the saviors of Chrysler with this Stellantis merger that's going to happen in 2021. I had to mention it. I had to say something about it. I was trying to wait until I created a whole podcast on it. I'm still going to create a whole podcast on it probably next year after it's more solidified and for me to give you all what exactly it's going to entail. But I will definitely create a podcast on the Stellantis thing that's happening between PSA and FCA, Peugeot, Citroën, and Fiat Chrysler. So yeah, that's basically all I have concerning French cars. They're quirky, they're weird, they're innovative, and we have a lot of things to attribute to them and a lot of things to thank them for because, it is amazing what the French have been able to do over these years. So thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, David Lucy Mabel. Please like us on Facebook, on Twitter, and please look us up on some of the other social media platforms. I should be coming out with some social media pages for these as soon as, winter break gets into full swing and I don't have to worry about school so much. But stay tuned for the next podcast, whatever it may be after this one. And thank you so much for listening, and have a good day, y'all.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.